Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 30 of the Inkwell Gamers Podcast. So, today is going to be a fun episode, just us talking about the current Lorcana metagame for Into the Inklings. We got a lot to talk about, so Dana, what do you say? Let's get right into it.
Love it. Let's do it.
Alright, so Dana, where do you want to start?
I feel like we should just maybe start with an overall impression of how we think it's kind of shaping up now that set 3 is a couple weeks in. Do you want me to start or do you want to start?
You can start, that's fine.
All right. So I feel like I'm actually pretty excited because now that we are a couple of weeks in, I feel as though we are seeing way more of an emergence of different ink color combination decks. I think with set 1 and 2, for the most part, it was pretty much just cut and dry. Either you had the Ruby Amethyst Control or you had the Steel Song. And obviously I feel like that's because the more cards you have, the more variety you're going to get. But it's really nice to see that we're already starting to see that already.
Yeah, like when it came to the first two sets, whatever colors had the best cards, those were just going to be the best decks, right? There's not a lot of cards in the card pool at that time, so when you have a control deck with Be Prepared and Merlin Rabbit, you're going to see that deck rise to the top. The same thing with Ariel and A Whole New World and all the toys that Steel Song had. So, yeah, it was mainly a two-deck race. You would see an occasional third deck pop up from time to time. But now we're seeing... Well, Ruby Amethyst is still good, spoiler alert, but we're seeing a wide variety of decks make an imprint.
Yeah. I feel like, I mean, with the first two sets, of course you saw people still play different decks other than those two. I mean, like me personally, I played Emerald Amethyst, and yeah, it might have been like a good put together deck, but it definitely wasn't one of the two dominant ones, right? And I think with set 2, we started to see that a little bit with this Steel Emerald like discard with your Prince John and your Bucky, but it wasn't really, I don't think it wasn't quite strong enough of a color combo yet to really be considered a competitive contender in the metagame. And now with set 3, I mean, we're seeing it. I mean, you have Emerald Steel, you have Amethyst Steel, you have Emerald Amethyst with like the Cursed Merfolk and the Ursulas. You're seeing Ruby Sapphire now with like a ramp into control, and we'll talk about specific decks that have been doing really well in tournaments. So obviously I think that's a testament that it's not just people trying out decks like they always have been the past two sets, but they're trying out different decks and it's actually doing really well in the competitive scene. So, I mean, we're even seeing color combos that up until this set, you and I had talked about too, where we called them like unconventional color combos. And one of them was Ruby Steel, which we never really got to do an episode on because set 3 released and then we started seeing Pirates. And
Right.
like, obviously it's not maybe the strongest, but it has potential and people are trying it out. And so we're even seeing color combos that people weren't even thinking about trying before.
Yeah, even within some color combinations that people have tried, there's also just some different decks within some specific color combinations.
Yeah.
So I think one of the first ones that do you want to start talking about the decks? Or do you want to do
I got some more to say.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I got some more generic stuff too. I feel like in set 1 and 2, we didn't see a whole bunch of strong combo decks. We saw some like niche synergies of like maybe a card working around with others as being an engine, like the whole Stitch Rockstar and Amber Steel, but now we're seeing Stitch being used as like a whole combo with the like 1 and 2 drops and the Pride Lands. I mean, we watched a video the other day where someone just kept top decking 1 and 2 drops and they completely flooded the board to where their Pixelborn screen was so freaking tiny. But that's like we're seeing this emergence of more decks where you have very powerful combos and synergies that it might have been like good in sets 1 and 2, but it was more like a supplemental thing to the deck. It wasn't decks being built entirely around, like, I mean, yeah, people, so like with Stitch, like, yeah, people were building like Stitch Rockstar decks, right? But they weren't building them like they are now, where you have Stitch, the Pride Lands, and then like all 1 and 2 drops. Maybe you play Bare Necessities too, just for more, or sorry, not Bare Necessities, Be Our Guest, for more consistencies, but like that's not how people were building with Stitch Rockstar in sets 1 and 2. So it's interesting to see now how maybe cards that were really strong are being used in different ways now.
Yeah, so I think kind of what's happened is that since the card pool has broadened, there are some cards like Stitch Rockstar and A Whole New World which are really powerful draw engines, and when you have really powerful draw engines like that, those are going to lead to the combo decks that you're going to see, because a lot of the times in order to be able to pull off the combo, you need to draw a lot of each combo piece, just because your opponents are going to try to interact with whichever combo pieces they see first. Like the only real combo deck in the first 2 sets was probably the aerial item deck that, you know, for example, I got like 20 lore off of it. It wasn't a good deck, but you could potentially 1-turn kill with a good draw, just because, well, A Whole New World plus Fishbone Quill is really powerful.
And I feel like not only are we seeing cards that people have always been putting in their decks, like Stitch Rockstar, being used in different ways, but we're also seeing cards that we have had in previous sets that weren't good at the time that are now becoming good, just simply because we have the cards for it. And the card that comes to mind for me is Chief Bogo. I think when we first reviewed it, we said there's just not enough Floodborn characters to make this card good. And then now, I mean, there's a deck that's built around that and Sheriff of Nottingham and the Bayou. And so it's really fun to see cards almost kind of get a second glance now that we have other ones that actually play into it and are good enough to play. Because, yeah, we had Floodborns, but a lot of them weren't good enough to put into a deck. So, and you didn't want to be putting bad cards in just because they held a certain characteristic, so you could achieve that synergy. But we're seeing more good Floodborns.
Yeah, Chief Bogo is the kind of card that just gets better the more cards are released, because the better Floodborn cards there are. Robin Hood was a really big pickup for that card, I think.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's not, it's kind of a, it's a card that's not played in every steel deck, right, as far as Chief Bogo is concerned, but it can definitely have a place as an anti-aggro card. So, yeah, that's a good example.
Yeah. And I think also one of the contributing factors to seeing more of a variety of different decks being explored and played and doing well right now is locations in some of them. I still don't think we will be seeing locations in every competitive deck, but I think there are locations that are definitely going to be played if you're playing in those colors. Personally, I don't think there's anything in like Sapphire that's good. I mean, we'll look at one that does play, but it doesn't seem that good to me. Maybe I'm wrong, because obviously there's a deck that did really well using it, but obviously the Pride Lands, the RLS Legacy, and the Jolly Roger, I feel like are the most, and the Bayou, are the 4 most prominent locations that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, the Queen's Castle is
also...
that's
right. All right, so 5.
Yeah, that's probably the best one, just because it goes in Ruby Amethyst the most consistently. So that's my pick for the best one. But yeah, the second best one, I feel like you didn't even mention. I think we're going to talk about that one pretty shortly.
All right, well, let's just dive into that, shall we?
All right, so yeah, I think the first deck that we're going to talk about is Blue Steel Ramp. Now, this deck has existed a little bit in the past, and it was a Whole New World Fishbone Quill deck, but it didn't necessarily have enough of the tools to really compete. But where this deck really shines is that Cogsworth is really, really good into these steel mirrors, and steel is probably the most played color currently.
Yeah, I would agree.
So
like we're seeing it, sorry, not to cut you off, but like we're seeing steel paired with every other color.
Yeah, steel is paired with everything, and Cogsworth, especially if you can get multiples down, is just the absolute best card into the steel mirror. It just kind of bricks Tinkerbell. It makes it so their grab your swords are ineffective, and it's a really good combo with Mr. Smee, because if you have Cogsworth out, Mr. Smee doesn't deal the 1 damage to itself, and Mr. Smee is a pretty well-statted 2-cost card, so...
I know you liked him a lot when we reviewed.
He's definitely a good one.
Yeah. So, run us through the specifics of this deck, will you?
Yeah, so this deck got second in the Beastie Online tournament. It kind of came out of nowhere, but I can see why. I think it was Moyen. Yeah, Moyen, he decided to play this tournament with this deck. Like, he's just ramping with Fishbone Quills and Mickey Mouse, right? And then you're able to recoup the card advantage from Fishbone Quill with Hiram Flaversham and Popsicle, which is just an incredibly good combination of cards. He played a lot of Gastons for the card advantage, but it's also just a character that quests for 3, and that's something that really adds up.
Puts a lot of pressure. One thing that I'm really surprised about, so like this deck is designed to like ramp into the control, right?
Yeah.
So I'm actually really surprised that aside from Fishbone Quill and Mickey Mouse Detective, they're not playing the other typical ramp cards that we see, such as we don't see the cheap Grammatala, and we're not seeing the 1 jump ahead. So I find that really interesting about this deck. And I feel like there's also cards that we've typically kind of pushed aside for not being good. Like he's playing Develop Your Brain and Nothing to Hide. And I think we originally felt like Nothing to Hide really sucked, but I'm interested that...
He's only playing one of them, so...
but still, like, instead of Nothing to Hide, why not do, like, another ramp card, in its place? So, I find that, I don't know, do you have any thoughts about that?
So, my guess is that he didn't want to play Grammatala just because it wasn't a 2-cost that it immediately impacted the board. Mr. Smee is a good threat against control decks, but it also is a good body against the aggro decks, and sometimes they can just ignore Grammatala, and it doesn't really do a whole lot. 1 jump ahead, I'm guessing they cut just because you can only have so many uninkables, right? And they're already playing like 4 Gaston. I think this deck has 17 uninkables, so if you want to play 3 of those, you're up to 20. So it was really hard to fit those in when you're trying to be as threat dense as he was being. And yeah, I'm guessing the Nothing to Hide just made it so that he wanted a 5th 1-cost card that could draw a card, and I think the Nothing to Hide it's the only other option besides Develop Your Brain. Develop Your Brain's better, so that's why he played 4, but he just wanted a 5th cost one, and it does at least have the upside of seeing your opponent's hand, so maybe you can play around to be prepared or what have you. So, and he definitely wanted to play Gaston, I'm guessing, because in general these decks can end up being a little threat-like, because sometimes you have to ink your Beasts and Tinkerbells early, and then you have kind of not a lot of ways to win, whereas Gaston really shores that up. So he wanted that as a good card advantage card, but also a good mid-range threat as well. And that's also why he's playing McDuck Manor. So I know you just looked at this card and you're like, I don't understand why someone would play this. But 9 willpower is actually like impossible to get off the board in the early turns. And like the only card that can really threaten this is Maui, which is good against everything, but
still can't even get it on
it can't even get it on 1 go. It takes 2 attacks unless they have like the Maui hook. But when you combine that with Grab Your Swords and Along Came Zeus's, you just have a lot of removals. So this card can kind of just sit and play a lot longer than it normally would. and you just need that card to try to win the game. Like, it's just a good threat. It stays in play. If you get 8 lore out of it, it probably did its job, especially when you're a deck that ends up being as threat light as this one.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'll give you that. Yeah, I think I definitely dismissed it because it didn't seem...
It's a vanilla card, but it just stays in play so long because it just has 9 willpower. Like, you just can't attack it efficiently early, and if your opponent is playing a non-ruby mid-range or control deck, there's just nothing they can do to get rid of it unless they have a couple Rise of the Titans in their deck. Like, it's just such a hard card to get rid of for a lot of decks, so it ends up putting in a lot of work.
Makes sense. All right. What you got next? Let's look at the next one.
All right, so the next deck we have is another Sapphire deck, which isn't something that we saw a whole lot of in the previous sets. This is just a Ruby Sapphire deck, control deck, pretty straightforward, going all the way up to Be Prepared's right. This one has a bunch of Tomatoas, a bunch of Maleficents, some Hades, Lady Tremaines, some Scars, Gastons. Like, this has all of the expensive threats in these decks, and that's something that I am really interested in. I think that is a good way to kind of go over the top of the mid-range mirrors and control mirrors, is just playing all the expensive threats you can have. And one thing that I actually like is that they're just playing a ton of different 2-drops so that they can interact early on the board as well with some efficient characters, even ones that you don't necessarily see a lot, like Stitch, Little Rocket.
Or the Mulan. We really didn't see Mulan Soldier in Training. Didn't really see a lot.
Yeah, so the deck list that we're looking at probably isn't the most popular deck list, but it is Zepha's deck. He's a pretty popular YouTuber, streams on Twitch, right? So plays a lot of games, has a lot of experience, and he's playing like one of the 4-cost Mulans with Rush, some Stitches with Rush, the 2-cost Scars, Gastons. Like, he's just playing so many wild cards that you just don't normally see. It's kind of awesome. The one change that I have really liked about the Ruby Sapphire decks is that you have the inclusion of 1 or 2 Lucky Dimes now, and that card in combination with Tamatoa, that can just end the game so fast. Tamatoa quests for 5 a lot of the time, and Lucky Dime, you can just pay 2 and exert it to, if you have a Tamatoa out, game like 4 or 5 lore. It's just so much. It's a really efficient way to end the game. The main issue with it is that it's just a 7-cost uninkable that doesn't affect the board a lot of the times when you play it, so you just can't play too many of them.
See, that brings up a good point that I want to circle back to. The Lucky Dime, I guess as like a newbie compared to you when it comes to TCGs, I'm reading the card as though you're gaining lore equal to their lore that is, like, unmanipulated, I guess.
Printed on a card.
Yeah. So, like, with Tamatoa, it only shows 1 on his card, and then he has the potential to have more. So I was always reading Lucky Dime as though it was however many is actually printed on the card prior to, like, amping it up.
Right. Now, yeah, I can definitely see that, but it does say Tamatoa gets +1 lore for each item you have in play, and then Lucky Dime basically exerts to gain lore equal to a character's lore. So if you have 3 items in play, Tamatoa has 4 lore, so it gains a 4 lore, which is just so sick. It's just such a good way to finish the game, and Tamatoa is like the perfect in-game card for these decks because it provides card advantage with the popsicles. It is not an easy threat to challenge off the board, and it just gives you a lot of inevitability in the long games. So
one thing that I'm surprised to see in this deck is, and maybe it, again, like, we're seeing people play this card, and it has, I think, surprised the both of us at first, is the Maui Whale, because I think at first we didn't think it was playable.
Yeah, it just seemed really slow, but it is another enabler for your Maui Fishhook, and it's just another card that can take out 2 or 3 characters, you know, the turn after it's played. It's just like an inkable Scar Vicious Cheater, right? So I can see it. It's really good at attacking locations, multiple locations, and it's just going to be the biggest thing on the board. So it's also really good at taking out Tamatoas as well, which I can appreciate. But that being said, I'm still not a huge believer in it. I still think it might be too slow, but this is a ramp deck, so maybe you can play it on turn 5 and it's just awesome. Who knows?
Any other things that you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, this deck, again, playing McDuck Manor as a new card. Another card that I kind of like a lot is Heart of Tefiti. When you're playing the control mirrors and they're not putting a lot of pressure on you, this is just a card that can gain you a lot of advantage over the long game, just giving you 4 or 5 extra ink before you need to Flaversham it. That's really powerful. This one's playing Sumerian Talisman, which makes a lot of sense when you're playing cards like Maui, Scar, Queen of Hearts, Stitch, and Mulan. All these cards I just want to challenge as much as possible. So that's kind of cool. Pretty cool draw engine, but I wouldn't be surprised if this version of the deck isn't super consistent. But I do believe that there is a really good version of this out there just because it goes so much bigger than all the other control decks. I think this is going to be, like, if you're preparing for a tournament, this is the control deck that you really need to figure out how to beat, because for one, Be Prepared is its best answer against aggro decks, but it also has a pretty robust late game as well. So it would be a hard deck to deal with, and this one would be on my radar when I'm playing in a tournament next, which is this weekend. So yeah.
And we can talk about
it is on my radar.
We can talk about at the end what you're gonna play. So, but next one.
All right, so the next one is a Ruby Amethyst control deck. So yeah, we're getting all the control decks out of the way. This is a deck that I really love playing, and I'm continuously trying to find, different iterations of it that I think will work properly. The one we're looking at is Quantum Lorcana, another YouTuber's deck list. The most notable thing to me is 2 Sorcerer's Spellbooks. I actually do like that. It's not a card that I like a lot, but I think it's a really important card in the mirror and against the other control decks like Ruby Sapphire. 4 Queen's Castle with only 2 Jim Hawkins. Jim is a really good tempo play, but the sizing on him and no evasion, not having evasive or ward or something kind of hurts him. But yeah, I do like some of the Queen's Castles. I like the list a lot. My favorite lines of play are usually just Rafiki Mystical Fighter into Pinocchio on turn 2, and that's usually just good enough to take care of your first character and slow you down.
Yeah, I know that you've been playing a variation of a Ruby Amethyst against me, and using Pinocchio to continually exert my character is really freaking annoying, and I don't know how to stop you.
Yeah, so the reason why Pinocchio wasn't really played before is that you didn't have a really good 1-cost card. You were always playing Minnie Mouse, which isn't good at killing anything.
Yep.
It's good in combination with Teeth and Ambitions because it doesn't die to the Teeth and Ambitions, but yeah. So now that we have Rafiki, Rafiki into Pinocchio is a good way to take out opposing Cinderella or opposing Minnie Mouse or opposing Rafikis. It keeps them off their morphs or their Robin Hoods so they can't shift as often, right? It takes out 3-cost Ursula so they can't double sing the next turn. So having that combination of cards is really what makes Pinocchio shine now. Not to mention that it's also just a 2-cost character that you can repeatedly bounce and get value off of.
I don't really have super much to say about this deck just because it is a pretty typical Ruby Amethyst deck that we're seeing, but I'm kind of surprised that they're not playing any Ruby locations. They are playing the Queen's Castle, but I guess I expected them to play the RLS Legacy or the Jolly Roger, but...
So, Jolly Roger, it just doesn't fit just because
you're
it's
right.
not Pirate theme. Thoral's Legacy is an interesting one. You'd want probably all 4 Jim Hawkins if you were doing that. The biggest issue that I found with it is that it's just another uninkable, so it's hard to fit too many in a deck that wants to get up to 7 ink to play Be Prepared. The one I have considered is Agrabah, just because it's cheap, it's inkable, but it can still kind of put on some pressure with the 2 lore gain. But the locations that just instantly die to Maui are kind of a tough sell for me. But yeah, besides that, this is just kind of a pretty straightforward Ruby Amethyst deck. It's something that you're going to see in every tournament. It's not like a super broken deck or anything like that. It is just incredibly consistent. It's always going to put up good results because just the cards in it are reasonably powerful individually. Anything else to say about that one?
Well, I feel like one card that you've been playing in your Ruby Amethyst deck that I don't see here is Prince Eric, and that has been such a nuisance. I absolutely hate when you throw it down, and the best I can do is try to bounce it back instead of banish it. So I'm a little interested as to why they didn't maybe consider it for this deck, but other than that, like you said, this is a pretty standard, straightforward deck list.
Yeah, so my guess is that, again, it's an uninkable card, right? So you can only fit so many, but besides that...
I mean, they don't have too many. What are they running?
They have 14, which has been kind of... 14, 15 is kind of like the standard for Ruby Amethyst decks in this set, but for me, the amount of Erics I'm going to play is pretty correlated to the amount of Teeth and Ambitions I play. Just because the two are a pretty good combo together, and without being able to enable Prince Eric yourself, it can be hard to get the value out of it sometimes. And along with that, there are some decks he's just not that good against other Ruby Amethyst decks. He kind of just gets swept away under Be Prepared or just trades with a Maui, which is fine, or Madam Mim or something. But he is really good against the steel decks that you've been playing.
Makes sense.
It's like you seen Grab Your Swords, but then I get to take out whatever sung it. So there's definitely a place for him. It just kind of is determined by what you're wanting to beat.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think Be Prepared is also really good against the steel decks as well. So maybe you don't need him so much.
Makes sense. All right. Next one.
All right. So this is probably our first combo deck. We are taking a look at Fnatic's Jafar deck. It's a pretty, mid-rangey steel amethyst deck. But the draw to playing this is that you have the combo with Jafar in a whole new world.
So good.
Yeah. Like, you can just gain 14 lore in one turn, and it's not like that crazy. No, that's not something that happens all the time, right?
But we have seen it.
But we have seen it. It can happen, and it's just kind of a way to get free wins out of nowhere, which is something I can appreciate.
Yep, because you do it to me all the time.
I would never. That's my Magic style. That's my Lorcana style a lot of time. I actually don't like this deck very much. I think it's kind of fragile without actually having Jafar in play. I just don't think you necessarily do a whole bunch. If your opponent can take the Royal Vizier off the board or the Dreadnought, this one's playing Keeper of Secrets. If you can take those cards off the board, then you're never really threatened to get comboed by Jafar Striking Illusionist, and that just makes the deck a lot less scary. If you keep Jafars off the board, that's going to definitely give you time to play Be Prepareds, and they don't really have a good comeback to that. Not to mention that they don't have Wraths besides Grab Your Swords, which is a really good card against the aggressive decks, but against the other control decks, it doesn't necessarily do a whole lot. So this deck's fine. If you like playing the combo stuff, it is probably fun to play. I definitely give it that. But besides that, it's not my style, actually.
Yeah, I am in agreement with you on that as well. It also is not my play style, but it's one of those decks where you see people online have just incredible turns and it seems like a lot of fun and you just want to try it out just to see how it feels, but it might not be something that you're comfortable enough to play with at like a tournament. It's just maybe something that you want to try it at League just to see how it, like, not saying that this isn't good enough to play in a tournament, but like if it is, I feel like I always try to find decks that are out of my comfort zone of a play style. And I want to try them out at League where it's almost kind of like...
It's low stakes.
It's low stakes, but it still might be a really good competitive deck, but I might not play it well because it's not my play style. You know what I mean?
Yeah. This kind of seems like a deck you're going to see a lot of the highlight reels of, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like... You're gonna see people just posting all these videos of getting 21 lore in one turn, or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But what you're not gonna see is the very mid draws that it can have. I mean, it's still playing good cards, whether it's Robin Hood, Tinkerbell, and Beast. But in order to play the combo, you just have to play some subpar cards like Jafar Dreadnought and Jafar Keeper of Secrets. And
hey, don't down Jafar Dreadnought, because I played him in my Emerald Steel discard deck, and it actually, I liked that card a lot.
Yeah, it's not like a bad card. I just don't think it's a great card.
Maybe I think I liked it so much because I felt like I didn't have a lot of strong 4-cost characters, so that one was like...
It was like really fit in.
It was a solid role player.
Yeah, it also fit the curve, so it made sense in that deck.
Yeah.
And it kind of sad to say, but like Elsa, this deck's going up to Elsa Spirit of Winter, which might be just a little too slow nowadays. But regardless, this is a deck that you need to know how to play against, need to be prepared for. See what I did there?
I didn't, but thank you for... I feel like you weren't obvious at first, and the way you said it, you needed to really emphasize it.
Yeah, it's just a deck that you will see and can pull off some incredible turns and wins seemingly from nowhere, but yeah, I think it's just a little too fragile for me, so...
Fair enough.
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
Cool. The typical OG Steel Song, but modified for set 3 cards. Let's see it.
Yep, so just an incredibly powerful deck. I think the issue with this, why we don't see it played more, is because there's a lot of decisions to make in this deck, so it's pretty hard to play, actually. It did win the last Thea Boyson tournament in the hands of a very, very good Magic player who now plays Lorcana, so that doesn't really surprise me. But this is just a really powerful deck. If you know how to pilot it well, I think you'll see some really good results with it. Again, playing Stitch Rockstar, the addition of Kita, I think is pretty interesting to me, just letting you get extra quests in without having to worry about your characters being challenged.
Kita is so good.
Yeah, what's interesting is it also protects your beast, so you can quest with your beast and not worry about it taking damage. The addition of the bare necessities means you're not just straight dead to be prepared as much as it used to be. The card that I would probably try to fit in is Shift Cinderella. I think that card is just so good in the mirrors. It's so hard to deal with that I would definitely find a way to fit that one in. But
you're already playing Ballroom Sensation, so you already have a I mean, yes,
you already have a shift target, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'd probably try to play a 4th Ballroom Sensation, and then try to fit in some Cinderella Stout-Hearteds, maybe take out a Lantern or something. I don't think you need all 4, just because drawing multiples isn't great. But yeah, this is just a really consistent, really powerful deck. You don't see it that often, just because I think it's hard for people to play really well. All right, the next deck that we're going to talk about is kind of right in your wheelhouse. This is Specimen, great YouTuber and streamer. It's his mid-range Emerald and Steel deck. So, Dana, you're the expert on this one. What do you think about his list?
Oh gosh. I mean, you're playing the typical, like, strong steel cards. So you got Beast, you got Tink.
Yeah, you're playing all the steel cards that are in every steel deck.
Yep.
Yes.
And then, of course, we're also seeing Morph because, I mean, being able to shift Beast on turn 3 is just absolutely insane. And so if you have the opportunity to do that, like, obviously, I mean, it's going to be a huge threat for your opponent. Both the Ursulas, I am glad that we're still seeing both of them being played. I figured at one point one of the two would drop off, but I like how they both interact with songs but in different ways. Obviously, one, you get to not only have your opponent discard a song, but like you get to look at their whole hand when they do it. And then Deceiver of All, just basically playing two songs, or same song back to back, is pretty good too. So I really like that we're seeing both of those in here. One song that I really wish I played in my deck that they're playing in this one is Along Came Zeus. That's such a good card. It's hard when you look at Steel Emerald decks. I mean, a lot of the good Steel songs are uninkable. But, I mean, you at least have Strength of a Raging Fire and Strike a Good Match in there, too, which I used Strike a Good Match in my deck more than inking it, which kind of surprised me because I feel like I always tend to want to ink cards like that if I see them. But also, Strength of a Raging Fire is just a card that has performed better than I anticipated as well. And so, I'm liking it.
Yeah, those two cards in combination with Ursula, Deceiver of All, are incredibly good. So if I were to play his deck, I would probably play the Buckies. He's playing the Buckies. I know you don't. The Buckies kind of give you a good secondary. Maybe that's your primary game plan, depending on what deck you're playing against. If you're playing against Ruby Amethyst, it's pretty good in that matchup because just whittling down their resources so they can't be prepared you on 7 is really strong. And Bucky in combination with Ursula Deceiver is really good at doing that. The versions that don't play Bucky, I'm not particularly scared of being the Ruby Amethyst player just because they will get swept up by Be Prepared at some point. And yeah, that's like Maui is just an incredible card against them because it trades into all their characters really effectively as well. But yeah, Strike a Good Match, Strength of a Raging Fire, and Let the Storm Rage On are all just incredible combinations with Deceiver of All that I would definitely play all 12 of those.
I like that they're also playing Rise of the Titans too because, I mean, we were just talking about the Ruby Amethyst decks, that the ones that do play RLS Legacy and Agrabah and the Jolly Roger, if you see it, well, I mean, in this Steel Ruby Pirate decks, but all of those I feel like present a really good threat. And Steel really doesn't have a big character that is played in every Steel deck. Like Maui is played in every Ruby deck. That could be a really good way to remove locations off the board. I mean, your Beast and your Tink and your Robin Hood are probably... I mean, no, Robin Hood is only a 3/6, but...
Yeah, same thing with Beast. Like, they're just so slow at killing locations.
Yes.
Yeah, especially the reason why the McDuck Manor gets played is because something like Tinkerbell, which is your biggest character, and even Beast, when he's damaged, they just are so slow at taking it out.
And you know what? I feel bad. I forgot about McDuck Manor because I always previously just I just underrated it. But I mean, you're right. Like, you could throw in a couple Rise of the Titans and then you don't have to worry about taking a couple turns to get rid of a 9 willpower location. And so I really like them playing that as well. I think I might consider adding Rise of the Titans to mine because I do feel like when I play you, when you get your locations down, I'm like, crap.
Yeah, they can be hard to deal with, but it's also good at just hitting items. You can hit your opponent's fishbone quill or fish hook, or it's really versatile, but it's also inkable, so there's like no downside of playing this card, which I really like. I think it's a card that you should probably include in your Steel Emerald deck.
Yeah, for sure. But other than that, I mean, one thing the thing is, there's a card that I feel like you could add, but in all honesty, looking at the deck list, I just feel like I don't know where I would cut cards in order to fit it in, but Cinderella is such a huge threat. I mean, it's a big questing character, but then also is very strong and has a lot of willpower, and it's just all around a big threat. But like I said, it's hard to see what I would cut to add her in. So I don't know. I don't mind the deck as it is.
Yeah, I could see potentially maybe getting rid of some of the 1-cost Captain Hooks. I think that's probably your worst card in the deck.
It's just kind of there to be something to play on turn 1 if you need it.
Yeah, if you need it, but it's still probably just the worst card in the deck still. So I could see maybe cutting 2 of those for 2 of the Cinderellas, just because Cinderella is so powerful, especially when you have all these songs.
And if you're playing Morph too, you don't have to be kind of locked into playing the smaller Cinderella in order to get to her. Like, I like that. I mean, Morph's such a good card for us to be able to add more consistency for being able to shift, but not maybe necessarily having to play the baby versions.
Yeah, the bad small versions, Yeah. Yeah. So, I think this deck is pretty good. I know some people probably think it might be the best deck in the format. I'm not there yet just because it hasn't won a big tournament, but it is definitely a deck you should know how to play against, especially if they're playing Bucky. If they're playing like Bucky and Prince John, then I honestly don't think those matchups are that hard. Like, if you get a 3/3 on the board, they just can't ever do anything about it because their characters and play suck. So you can just pressure lore for the first 5 turns of the game, and they don't have good recourse. And that's kind of how I feel about Bucky as well, especially because a lot of the time the games kind of go long because you're just sitting there with a Bucky in play and an Ursula Deceiver in play that just can't quest for anything. So you're not ending the game time soon. So when you're making your opponent discard cards, they actually still have the time to draw into the cards that they need because you can't finish the game.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, you're slowing them down, but you're also not doing anything to where you can surpass them.
Yeah, you're not presenting a clock to threaten them at all. Unless you have a really good hand where you're shifting. If you go Robin Hood on 1, Bucky on 2, shift Robin Hood on 3, now we're talking. But if you do outside of those kind of draws, then Bucky's really not that scary.
All right, on to the next.
All right, we're starting to get into the aggro decks now. I know this this says bounce control, but it is not a control deck. It is very much an aggressive deck. If you're playing Maleficence and Cursed Merfolk, you are not a control deck. But yeah, so Maleficence, Cursed Merfolk.
Well, really quick, whose deck is it?
It is Gaming Inkwell. This deck has quite a few views on it, so they're probably pretty popular. I'm not super familiar with them myself, but this is just a tempo-ish aggressive deck, right? Maleficence, Cursed Merfolks. They're even playing Pua as another 2-cost character that can quest for 2, Flynn Riders, and then just all the generic good characters that are in Emerald, Amethyst. Ursula to combo with Mother Knows Best is really powerful.
Ginny on the Job.
Ginny on the Job, your old favorite.
My old friend.
I would probably find a way to play a 4th goat in this person's deck list because that seems like the exact thing you want to do is just goat people. I would probably take out the 2 Yzmas, add a Merlin goat and a Madame M snake just to round out that whole package, honestly. It's kind of weird. Or maybe I just take out the 2 bounces that this person has. That it's just not that great of a card. So
oh yeah, I would take that one out too because you're playing Mother Knows Best and you're playing Genie on the Job. And
you're also playing Kit Cloud Kicker, which is a pretty good one as well.
Yeah, and I just feel like I like you said, I also don't like bounce I don't think it's a very good card. So yeah, maybe take those two out and then add your fourth goat and your
fourth goat, your fourth snake, and you'll probably get a lot more consistency. Goat just has to be one of the best cards in this deck. I can't imagine not playing this deck without the fourth goat.
Plus you'd be gaining Inkables too.
Yeah.
So definitely a positive there.
Yeah, the only thing that I don't like about this person's deck list is that they don't have any Merlin Rabbits. Again, it's an uninkable, so it might be tough, but...
Maybe take out the Yzmas, like you said, take out the bounces, and then you get your goat, your snake, and your rabbits.
Yeah. Maybe you can take out the Sorcerer's Spellbook or a Queen's Castle as well, just because Merlin Rabbit is just one of the best cards in the game, I think, so... especially in combination with all your bounce stuff. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, but this is a really aggressive deck. It's just trying to tempo your opponent out and get to 20 lore much faster than what they are. So, this is probably a deck you would like outside of the bounce characters.
Yeah, I think I just got to get used to it. That was something that I didn't get on the whole bounce hype when set 2 came out, and so I'm a little bit behind with getting comfortable with the way that those cards work. So I think if I can get used to that and the order of things, then I probably would like this deck because you're playing some evasive characters, you're playing some characters that quest for multiple lore, so that is right up my alley.
Yeah, and you also have some interaction with whether it's Kit, Cloud Kicker, Mother Knows Best, or even Genie on the job, just to get some characters out of the way if you need to. Rafiki is a good challenger early, and Merlin Crab really helps with the early game as well.
And that's something that I felt like Emerald Amethyst really lacked in set 1, especially when I was playing that really heavy, is I just felt like I didn't have cards that challenge other characters. Like the Steel Song and the Ruby Amethyst, I didn't have anything in my Emerald Amethyst deck that could really deal with their characters that threatened me. So
yeah, you fall behind and then you just don't have any recourse. Like,
right. And I think
you can't challenge them with your 1/2 Flynn Rider, right?
Right. So I feel like the Crab and the Rafiki really help with that.
Yeah, and Kit is actually a lot better card than, during our set review and our star deck upgrade, I said that Kit was a pretty good card, and it's turned out that he he actually is. Bouncing your opponent's Rafiki or something like that, so they can't Mad Amendment the next turn, or maybe you just bounce like a Maleficent Binder Time, just so they don't get that extra lore on their turn as well. It's just a good card. I like it.
For sure. Also, I'm sorry. I really gotta say this. I am really sorry if you hear like panting in the background. For some reason, our dog is just snoozing, but like breathing very heavy. So
yeah, he's a goober.
It's not. I just wanna. If you were curious as to what that is. All right. Anyway, 2 decks left. Let's move on.
Yeah, going back to the Emerald Amethyst deck. I think that if, like, the Sapphire control decks get really popular, this could be, like, a really aggressive version. Maybe you play more Maleficent by Inner Times. Could be really good just because they kind of historically have a really hard time dealing with characters like Curse, Merfolk, and Maleficent. So... Or
even like the Pinocchio, because this deck doesn't really have a lot of uninkables in it, so I feel like if you were to squeeze in some Pinocchios too, the one that quests for 3 is that Star Attraction.
Yeah like even something like that, if you can find room for it, some version of this deck could be really good if you can kind of predict the meta game, and there's going to be a lot of kind of higher end control decks, because if they don't have, like, their Queen of Hearts or something, then you're going to kind of run away with it. Alright, so the next deck that we have is an Amber Steel combo deck. It is a deck that I know Dana is kind of interested in looking into. Yeah, it's just like a one drop flood the board deck. It has some explosive starts because you have Stitch Rockstar to go along with the Pride lands. And essentially what that means is that all your one cost characters will often cost 0. So every time you play a one cost character, you just kind of get to draw a card. And you're playing, I don't know how many one cost characters, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32. You're playing 36 one cost characters in this deck. So there will be times where you just draw like 10 cards and just put them all on the board. And if your opponent doesn't have Be Prepared or Grab Your Swords, they're probably going to lose.
Yep.
And this deck can kind of do that on turn 4 as well with, a good draw.
Yeah. I'm really interested in this deck. We watched a clip, like I said earlier, where the person just kept top decking and flooded their board with it. I think one of the things that they mentioned is, if you don't get Stitch both of them in your starting hand to be able to shift early in the game, it kind of is too slow and you're probably not going to do anything with it. So this deck is heavily reliant upon your starting hand and making sure you're mulliganing for your Stitch New Dog and Stitch Rockstar. Otherwise, you could win still without the Pride lands, but you can't win without Stitch in your starting hand.
Yeah, if you don't have Stitch on turn 4 or, maybe 5, that might be pushing it. It's going to be really hard for you to be able to beat the other steel decks. That's like the most popular color. It's going to be hard for you to beat any amount of Grab Your Swords in that case. This deck it's going to be hard to beat any kind of Be Prepareds. Hopefully you can combo faster than the Be Prepared, but it's really glass cannony. If they have a way to deal with your Stitch Rockstar or you don't draw it, then I just don't think you have any hope in the game. But that being said, this deck can do some pretty ridiculous things on turn 4. So it's a deck that I'd want to try out just to see how it is. Pluto makes shifting onto turn 3, then putting a character into the Pride lands on turn 4 doable. So yeah, it's a turn 4 combo deck, hopefully. And Be Our Guest and the Bare Necessities, even though they're not characters, they are good cards at helping enable that. I might want to play a couple more Bare Necessities instead of maybe the Whole New Worlds, just so you have more game against Grab Your Swords.
Yeah, and actually now that I'm thinking about this, the play clip that we watched, they were actually doing Amber with Emerald in order to acquire Flynn Rider to be able to use him as a prince. This one has Simba, obviously, so that'll give you your prince, but that's just a different variation of how they acquired that.
Yeah, I would say you might need more than just Simba's, and Flynn Rider's a good option. I do like Simba, though, because it is a 1 cost, as opposed to Flynn Rider's 2 cost, but at the same time, you can play the 1/3 Flynn Rider and the 2 drops, so you might have a little more consistency. But you also get Ursula Deceiver when you play Emerald, and maybe instead of playing the Bare Necessities, you can just play 4 Ursula Deceivers, so you have more hits off Stitch, and that'll probably make it more likely that you can interact with their Be Prepared or Grab Your Swords early.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to say that too. Yeah, it definitely helps against the 2 most controlling colors.
Yeah, the 2 most
the colors that would
board wipes.
Yeah, the colors that would absolutely destroy this deck. So nonetheless, it still has the same game plan.
Yeah.
1 cost floods.
Love it. The last deck that we're going to talk about is Specimen. Again, YouTuber, streamer. His Rockstar Stitch aggro deck. Now, this is just a 60 card deck with 60 characters, right? Very lean, very efficient. Goes all the way up to Stitch and Perdita, which I think Perdita is actually a really good one because just buying back a curse to Merfolk can be really good, or Lilo Making a Wish, but it can also buy back Piglet, which is a 2-drop that can quest for 3 lore, or as Simba to help protect your other characters. having Ursula also to buy back so you can maybe make them discard their sweeper, like Be Prepared, is also insanely good.
Now, I haven't watched any gameplay of this deck, but I'm really nervous that they're just playing all characters. How does it, as someone who is a like experienced TCG player, how does that make you feel?
I'm okay with it, but like Specimen is playing Joshua Sweet the Doctor instead of Rapunzel. I'm guessing just because it has a bodyguard, it has a 5 toughness butt, but I mean, I still have to imagine that Rapunzel is just a much better card because it can heal your Perditas or your Stitch Rock Stars. But with that being said, maybe just having the 5 willpower bodyguard to protect them, maybe that's good enough. Maybe you're already drawing enough cards. I don't know. I haven't really played with this deck that much.
A little bit of an off tangent for me. I know Joshua Sweet is like a buff character, so it makes sense that they made him a bodyguard, but he's literally a doctor. So why didn't they make him a healer? I mean, like, obviously, because Rapunzel's a healer too in that same ink slot, but they could have made him a different ink slot.
Well,
and also a healer.
He's not gifted with healing, Dana. So he is a healer, but he is not gifted with healing like Rapunzel is.
I mean, he's gifted with the knowledge of science.
That's fair.
He might not have magic, but he is an MD, so.
That's true. Which is more important, though?
Magic.
All right, there you go. This deck has like 20 uninkables, though, and it seems like it just... I have a really hard time thinking about playing these decks right now because steel is the most popular color. I've already said this, but any deck that just gets wiped away by Grab Your Swords and doesn't have a lot of gameplay against that is just not something I'm super interested in. And this is exactly that. So, yeah, this is a hard deck for me to get behind, playing 20 uninkables and just getting wiped up by one of the most popular cards in the format. I think you have to be prepared for an aggro deck, which is why all these decks play Grab Your Swords, but I don't think people are really going to have success with them as long as that is the case. Unless I did mention earlier that maybe the Sapphire Ruby control decks get really popular, then you can play an aggro deck for like that one tournament, but I just don't see it right now.
Well, that's a good segue into what we'll talk about last. And since you don't see yourself playing this deck, you want to talk about what you do see yourself playing this weekend.
Yeah, so I am going to be in the Thea Boyson tournament again this weekend, kind of with 3-3 on the last one. Didn't do as well as I hoped.
And you used what?
I used Emerald Steel, which I do think is a good deck, but I think my deck was not built properly, and that cost me probably a lot of percentage points, so I don't like that. I am just going to go back to Old Faithful and play Ruby Amethyst.
Wow, what a surprise.
I know. It's...
Sorry, I love you, but it's
very predictable.
It's predictable that you would go back to that.
Yeah, it is a deck that is extremely consistent, reasonably powerful, and I think as long as you know how to mulligan each specific matchup, then whether you win game 1 or not, you can be advantaged in game 2 and 3, whether you're on the draw or the play, just by knowing what to mulligan for. Of course, if you're on the draw on the mirror, then they're probably favored, but
which, with being a tournament on Pixelborn, this is something that's, I feel like, completely different if you're playing on Pixelborn versus in person in a tournament, is they tell you what your color combo matchup is now.
Well, not for tournaments, though.
Oh,
so,
I've only watched you for, because obviously I'm not going to be in the room when you're doing your tournament stuff, but I only watched you for casual play, and I assume that's how the opening screen was for all of the games.
Yeah, not for the tournament stuff, so you're kind of just in the dark
You're blind bit. Like you would be in person.
Which is the way it should be. So I am going to try to build my deck to make sure I'm covered in the aggressive decks, just because I don't want to get kind of blindsided and if I don't have enough one drops, I don't just want to lose to the aggressive decks like that, right? Mm-hmm. But the card that I'm like least happy about in all of my Ruby Amethyst decks is Cuzco Wanted Llama. Mm-hmm. Like, it's a fine card, but it's not a good card. Mm-hmm. It is just like the last card you put in because it isn't bad, but it also isn't good in any specific matchup. It's just kind of there.
I feel like when this card first got revealed, you were really excited about it because, I mean, on the surface, it looks like really good. You're like, man, you could draw a card. So you basically just trade, or you replace, words. And I'm really sad to hear that it kind of disappoints you.
Like, it's not bad. It's just never great. And I kind of want to build my deck to make sure I have a little more game against other locations. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to try to prepare for that a little bit. And on top of that, I want a little bit more of a robust late game, because I think that the Sapphire control decks might be pretty popular this weekend. And if that's the case, I'm going to need basically as much of a late game as I can have against them. Like, you want to get out aggressive early so you can get the lore advantage early, but you also need to make sure that you can kind of go blow to blow once the games start getting grindy. Mm-hmm. So I gotta figure out the balance between being able to keep up with the aggressive decks but also having enough late game power as well. I mean, I don't think the aggressive decks are going to be great. I just don't want to not have very much game against them.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so locations. Are you playing the Queen's Castle? Yes or no? We don't have to go into your whole deck list, because obviously this comes out pre-tournament, but not that anybody would. I mean, who knows who listens?
Who knows? I think I am playing some amount of the Queen's Castle.
Okay, and then Agrabah?
Nope. Probably no other locations.
Oh, okay.
Just
only one.
Just some number of the Queen's Castles. Yeah, I think it's probably the best generic location, and I think it's good in the matchups where you might need some additional card advantage in the mid game. So I like it.
I mean, it's nice because it is inkable, unlike the RLS Legacy, and it is not vanilla, unlike Agrabah, which is inkable. So it kind of has the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and it doesn't just die to Maui straight up. So I really like that as well. So yeah. I'm probably going to play, I think the deck list I have right now has 2 of them. So, yeah.
Well, good luck to you.
Appreciate it.
You'll have to report back next week on how you did.
I will. Hopefully it's with a top 16 this time. That's the goal.
Love it.
All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I did. The metagame has become really interesting. There's like 10 different decks that you can play, and that hasn't always been the case.
I know, it's really exciting. That's what we've been saying for the past several months. Ever since the game was released, we're like, once we get more cards, the metagame's it's gonna be more of a variety, and we're finally seeing it. So
yeah, so I love it. This game really is just getting better and better, and it's awesome. All right, Dana.
Sorry, I was drinking. Water. I was drinking water for clarification, but...
For Dana, I'm Dalton. We are the Inkwell Gamers. Have a great weekend, and good luck if you're in any tournaments.
Have a good weekend, guys.